Today I fucked up by telling my daughter to do a DNA test. For fun, obligatory. This happened a few months ago and I'm still not fully over it. Disclaimer. Also obligatory. I am in this story the architect of my own disaster. I didn't get tricked into this. I didn't stumble into it. I actively cheerfully suggested it with zero awareness that I was about to detonate a bomb that had apparently been sitting quietly in my family for 26 years. My name's David. I'm 53. My daughter Amanda is 26. And this is the story of how a $79 spit-in-a-tube kit from one of those genealogy companies ended up unraveling my entire understanding of my own marriage. It started innocently, the way these things always do. Amanda had got really into genealogy over the past year, one of those hobbies that seems to hit people in their mid-20s, somewhere between figuring out who they are and having disposable income for hobbies for the first time. She'd built out this elaborate family tree using an app, tracked down some old immigration records for my side of the family, even found a distant cousin in Poland we didn't know existed. It became a fun little thing between us. Actually, she'd call me with updates. I'd dig through boxes in the attic looking for old photos to help her fill in gaps. Sunday dinner in April, she mentioned she was thinking about doing one of the DNA testing kits, the spit-in-a-tube kind, to round out the genetic side of the tree, see if there were any surprises, maybe connect with more distant relatives. She seemed a little hesitant about it. Actually said something about how her friend had done one and found out some weird stuff about her family, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to open that door. This is the part I want everyone to sit with, because it's the part that haunts me. I was the one who said, completely lightly, completely without thinking, oh, just do it, it's fun, worst case you find out you're 12% Scandinavian or something. My wife Jennifer was sitting right there at the table when I said this. I did not, at the time, register anything unusual about her reaction. Hindsight has been doing a lot of very unwelcome work for me lately. She got very quiet and started reorganizing the food on her plate in a way that, looking back, was almost certainly a stalling tactic. But at the time I just thought she was tired. We'd had a long week. Amanda ordered the kit that night right there at the table, laughing about it, genuinely excited. I remember feeling proud of myself actually for encouraging her hobby, for being a fun, supportive dad. I want that on the record. I felt good about this decision for approximately 6 weeks. The kits take a while to process. You spit in a tube, mail it off, and then wait somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks for results, depending on the company and how backed up their labs are. Amanda checked the app obsessively during that window, the way you check anything you're excited about. I checked in periodically too, mostly just asking results yet, the way you'd ask about a package tracking number. During this window, nothing seemed off in our house. Jennifer and I have been married 28 years. We met in college, got married at 25, had Amanda 2 years later, and then our son Tyler 3 years after that. 28 years is a long time, long enough that you stop really looking at your spouse in the specific forensic way you do early in a relationship. You just sort of coexist inside a shared rhythm. If something was different about Jennifer's energy that spring, I genuinely didn't clock it as anything more than normal life stress. She'd mentioned work had been busy. Her mother's health wasn't great. There were plenty of boring, plausible explanations available, and I reached for all of them. The results came in on a Thursday afternoon in June. Amanda called me at work, practically vibrating with excitement, wanting to go through the ethnicity breakdown together over the phone. It was fun, actually. Turns out we do have some Scandinavian in there, along with a bigger than expected chunk of Eastern European ancestry that connected nicely to some of the immigration records she'd already found. Genuinely a nice moment. I remember standing in the break room at work, grinning like an idiot at my phone. Then she said, oh, and it's got this DNA relatives feature where it shows you people in the database who share DNA with you. I've got a bunch of second and third cousins showing up. This is so cool. And then she went quiet. Dad, she said in a completely different voice, there's someone listed here as a half-sibling. I remember laughing actually, my first instinct being that it had to be some kind of database error, a common glitch these companies have where distant relatives sometimes get miscategorized. That's probably just a glitch, honey, those apps aren't perfect. No, Dad, it says close family half-sibling, with a shared DNA percentage that's like textbook half-sibling range. It's not a glitch range, it's a specific number. His name is Marcus Bennett, he's 31. I want to describe as precisely as I can what happened inside my body at that moment because I don't think I've ever felt anything quite like it before or since. Wasn't quite shock. Shock implies a kind of blankness, and what I felt was the opposite, a horrible flood of clarity, like 100 small confusing things from the last 3 decades suddenly reorganizing themselves into a pattern I'd never let myself see. Because here's the thing, I don't have a son named Marcus. I've never had a son named Marcus. Jennifer had an ex-boyfriend before we got married named, and I want to be very precise about this timeline because it matters enormously, someone she dated on and off during a period when she and I had also briefly broken up. We were young, it was messy, we got back together about 8 months later and never really talked about that gap in detail. Never asked for specifics because at the time and for the following 28 years it genuinely never occurred to me that there was anything to ask about. Marcus was 31. That put his birth right in the window of that 8-month gap. I told Amanda I needed to call her back. I didn't call her back for 3 days actually because I spent those 3 days in a fog, trying to figure out what to even do with this information before I said anything to anyone. I looked up public record. I found, with a speed that honestly terrified me at how easy it was, a Marcus Bennett, 31, living about 90 minutes from us, whose mother's name listed on an old social media profile was a woman I did not recognize, which briefly gave me hope this was all a coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence. Because when I finally sat Jennifer down on a Sunday morning at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd told Amanda to just do it. It's fun. 2 months earlier, and I asked her point blank whether she'd had a son during the time we were broken up in college. She didn't even try to deny it. She started crying almost immediately, actually before I'd even finished the question, which told me she'd been waiting for this conversation in some low-grade, dreaded way for a very long time, possibly since Amanda first mentioned the DNA kit at dinner that April, which explained the plate rearranging. The story once it came out was this. During our breakup in college, Jennifer had got pregnant by the guy she was seeing at the time. She hadn't told him they'd already broken up by the time she found out, and she'd made the decision at 22, scared and alone, to place the baby for adoption through a private, closed arrangement. She told almost no one. Her own mother had known and had, as far as Jennifer was aware, taken that secret to her grave 2 years ago. Jennifer had never told any of her friends. She certainly never told me, not when we got back together 8 months later, not when we got engaged, not at any point across 28 years of marriage, 2 more children, and what I had always believed was a foundation of total honesty. I was going to tell you eventually, she said, which is a sentence I think about constantly now because eventually had apparently been available to her for 28 years and never once felt urgent enough to act on. When? I asked. When were you going to tell me? She didn't have an answer. I don't think she'd ever actually let herself imagine a specific moment where she'd say it out loud. I think the way people do with things too painful or too complicated to face, she just filed it away somewhere and built an entire adult life on top of it, hoping the ground never shifted. I want to be clear about something. I don't think Jennifer is a bad person. 22, scared, alone in the early 90s, facing a decision like that, I can hold real compassion for that version of her, the one making an impossible choice under circumstances I can't fully imagine. What I struggle with, and what I'm still struggling with as I write this, isn't the decision she made at 22. It's the 28 years of marriage that followed it, built from my side, on an assumption of complete honesty that turned out to be incomplete in the most fundamental possible way. Amanda, understandably, has had an enormous reaction to all of this. She's gone from an excited genealogy hobbyist to someone processing the discovery that she has a half-brother she never knew existed, that her mother kept a secret of this magnitude for her entire life, and that the fun DNA kit her dad casually encouraged her to take turned into the mechanism that cracked the whole thing open. She's reached out to Marcus tentatively through the app's messaging system. He apparently knew he was adopted his whole life and had done the test hoping to find biological family. He had no idea, of course, that he was about to find an entire extended family he'd never known about, including a half-sister who was about to upend her understanding of her parents in the process of finding him. Jennifer and I are, as of this writing, still together, still working through it, in a kind of careful, exhausting, day-by-day way that I don't think either of us fully has language for yet. I believe her when she says she loves me and that the decision at 22 had nothing to do with how she felt about our relationship once we got back together. I also can't fully shake the feeling of having spent nearly 3 decades inside a version of my marriage that wasn't quite complete, without ever knowing there was a missing piece. I think what makes this genuinely qualify as a Today I Effed Up story, rather than just a family drama, is the specific, undeniable role I played in triggering it. I wasn't a passive bystander to some secret slowly coming to light on its own. I was the one who, in a moment of completely thoughtless enthusiasm, said, "Just do it. It's fun," to my daughter about a decision that ended up exposing my wife's most carefully guarded secret, in front of my wife at our own dinner table, without the faintest idea of what I was setting in motion. I've replayed that Sunday dinner more times than I can count. If I'd just said, "Up to you, sweetie," instead of actively encouraging it, if I'd been even slightly less enthusiastic, slightly more neutral, would Amanda have done the test anyway eventually? Maybe. Genealogy hobbies tend to lead there naturally. But I'll never know for sure, and there's a specific, gnawing guilt in knowing that I was the one who gave the final little push, cheerfully, with a joke about Scandinavian ancestry, into a secret that had been sitting quietly under my entire marriage for 28 years. Amanda has, somewhat darkly, started referring to it as the worst plot twist in the family tree app's history, which I think is her way of processing it with humor, the same way I'm apparently processing it by writing an extremely long post about it on the internet. About 6 weeks after the results came in, Amanda arranged a video call between herself, Marcus, and eventually me and Jennifer. I want to describe what that first call was like because I think it's the part of this story that surprised me the most, not the devastating part, but the strangely hopeful part buried inside it. Marcus, it turns out, had grown up about 90 minutes from us, raised by a kind, stable adoptive family who had always been open with him about being adopted, though they hadn't had much information to give him about his birth parents beyond a closed file and a general sense that his birth mother had been young and unable to raise him at the time. Done the DNA test, he told us, mostly out of idle curiosity, never really expecting to find close family. He'd assumed if anything he'd turn up some third or fourth cousins the way most people do. Finding out he had 2 half-siblings, a biological mother, and awkwardly, unexpectedly, a version of a stepfather in me all at once, seemed to hit him with a force somewhere between what Amanda and I had felt and something entirely his own. He was gracious about it in a way I don't think I could have managed in his position. He said at one point in that first call that he'd spent 31 years assuming his birth mother simply hadn't wanted to know him, and finding out that wasn't really the shape of the story that she'd thought about him, that she'd apparently kept a small box of things from that period that Jennifer later showed him, a hospital bracelet and a single photo, mattered to him more than any of the practical, logistical stuff around meeting a whole new family at once. Jennifer cried through almost the entire call. I did too, honestly, though for slightly different reasons, not grief exactly. More a kind of vertigo at watching a person exist in real time who I had no idea was even a possibility 24 hours earlier, and who now apparently was going to be some version of part of our lives going forward. I haven't mentioned my son, Tyler, much in this story, mostly because his reaction has been quieter and slower to unfold than Amanda's. Tyler's 23, was traveling for work when all of this broke, and got the news over a phone call from Amanda rather than in person, which I think changed how he processed it. He's been more withdrawn about the whole thing than Amanda, not upset with his mother exactly, but clearly needing more time and more distance to work through what it means that there's an entirely new sibling in the family structure he thought he understood completely. He's met Marcus once briefly at a low-key dinner Amanda organized about 2 months after that first video call. By his own account, it went fine, a little stiff, a little strange, but fine. I think Tyler's version of processing this is going to take longer and look different than Amanda's, and I've tried, as much as I can, not to push him toward any particular timeline for how he's supposed to feel about a half-brother who showed up, essentially out of nowhere, because of a hobby his sister picked up and a suggestion his father made without thinking twice about it. Jennifer and I are still together, still in counseling, still working through what it means to rebuild trust after a secret that large sat underneath our marriage for its entire duration. I've come to understand through therapy that what I'm actually grieving isn't the existence of Marcus. I don't blame Jennifer for a decision she made at 22, alone, scared, with far fewer resources and far less support than either of us had by the time we were actually raising kids together. What I'm grieving is something harder to name. The version of our marriage I thought I was in, the one built on an assumption of total transparency, that turns out to have had this one enormous, load-bearing exception the entire time. Jennifer has said more than once that she wishes she'd told me early on our honeymoon even, or in those first couple years, before the secret calcified into something that felt impossible to bring up without it seeming like an even bigger betrayal the longer she waited. I believe her. I also can't fully undo the feeling of having spent 28 years operating on incomplete information about the person I share a life with. We're working on it. Some days that feels like real progress. Other days it feels like we're just circling the same conversation from a slightly different angle each time, without ever quite landing anywhere new. There's a lesson in all of this, and I've thought about this a lot, mostly at 2 a.m. unable to sleep. It's not really about DNA tests specifically. It's about how casually we assume we know the full shape of the people closest to us, especially the ones we've been married to for decades. I didn't think there was anything left to discover about Jennifer. 28 years, 2 kids, a whole shared life. I thought that qualified as knowing someone completely. It didn't. There was a 22-year-old version of her, scared and alone, making a decision in a hospital room I'll never fully understand. And I had no idea that person existed inside the woman I married until a $79 spit tube and an overly enthusiastic dad comment cracked it open at our own kitchen table.